give a very brief overview of this new project that we are embarking on and that we are hoping to invite you all to become part of, and then also to have a chance to hear a bit about each other's work and some of the issues that you would like to raise and hopefully bring to the table as part of this new initiative. So as I said, I'm going to begin, and then my colleague, Anna Maria Buhler, will take over from me. Also here at the school and involved in the project is another colleague named Rebecca Meskin, who some of you have already spoken to, who is doing a lot of the work in terms of reaching out and bringing new faces and hooking us up with people who are doing this work in the field. So with that, I'm going to just introduce a bit about the origins of this project. The background was actually when the Oak Foundation, who is a private foundation, came to us here at the center, and they have traditionally funded on issues of violence against children with a heavy focus on sexual exploitation and abuse, but have mostly invested their resources in low and middle income countries in the area of protection and trying to improve the services and the responses to children who have been abused or experienced violence. I think that there is a rising recognition in the field writ large and also amongst the Oak Foundation and its grantees of a concern that providing services, while absolutely essential to our response to these problems, that we need to also think about how we can move towards what we call primary prevention in order to try to stop some of the violence and exploitation before it starts. Primary prevention is actually a term from public health, and we are a public health school, and it generally means it's contrasted with secondary prevention and tertiary or response. Primary prevention is when you actually are working to try to reduce overall levels of violence or to prevent future violence at the level of a community or a population. So that means you're working with people and you may not know, for example, whether or not they have been victimized in the past. The goal is to try to work with children, families, and other institutions in society to try to reduce the likelihood that children would be victimized. Secondary prevention generally is when you either are targeting a community that is at particularly high risk. So, for example, someone who's already experienced abuse in the home and you're working with that family to try to prevent re-abuse. And then moving on into the spectrum of response, which would be treatment or protection and services after an event. So this project was born out of the desire to start to do more research and thinking about how we can add to our portfolio issues around the prevention of violence against children and especially sexual exploitation and abuse, in addition to our work to try to assist children who have been abused. Now here at the center, at the school, we have work in a variety of areas and expertise in a variety of areas. We do a lot of work on violence against women and children, mostly in terms of trying to understand the origins and causality of these problems, as well as to evaluate interventions, to try to learn about what works and what is working or how we can best approach the problem in order to try to keep children safe. We also have a program of work on social norms, and this project is very much born of that area of work because there's a lot of interest in trying to look at what is the role of social norms and other and structural factors in perpetuating sexual exploitation and abuse of children. And so part of the reason that we were approached by donors interested in violence against children was because of our expertise working on social norms as it relates to violence against women. And the hope is that we can together try to bring some of that expertise and apply it to issues around violence against children. We also have background of working with men and boys, and again, a very important constituency if we're thinking about prevention. The area of sexual exploitation of children itself, though, is one that's relatively new to our center. And so this project will be a two-way, I hope, learning opportunity where we're learning much more from those of you who are doing research and working in the field, and we can then perhaps assist in some of bringing the knowledge base that we have on norms and other types of violence prevention. So the three main goals of the project is, one is to try to gain some conceptual clarity around issues and definitions and understanding sexual exploitation, both not just from the perspective that we may inherit from international instruments, but also how local individuals and communities conceptualize these issues, as well as those of you who are working in the field. We want to also sponsor and catalyze a series of research projects that will both help us understand more of the dynamics of sexual abuse or sexual exploitation, of children, as well as to what extent social norms play into perpetuating or basically perpetuating this problem. And then we also want to try to create a network or what we call a community of practice where those folks who are working in depth on this issue in their various different settings can come together to share insights, problem solving, and really try to build up an evidence base both of how to do research, how to do programming, and how best to serve the needs of children. So that's the three-part agenda of this program of work. So just a bit on the piece in terms of conceptual clarity. We're doing two pieces of work here. One is that we're doing a number of stakeholder interviews, and some of you may have already been approached by Rebecca or others of our staff, both to understand how sexual exploitation is conceptualized by the NGO and provider community, as well as we're doing interviews at the international level and in Europe, in Tanzania, Brazil, and a few other places, so that we get a real understanding of the range of ways in which people are defining and conceptualizing sexual exploitation. We're also doing sort of an analytic piece about the strengths and weaknesses of different ways of defining exploitation. And we're hoping that through this we can come up with a framework that might help us both guide our research and our thinking about exploitation, and also at least bring to the surface when people are working from different perspectives, and so that we're aware of how we're using language the same or differently. The second thing that we're doing is a systematic review of the literature. There's been a recent review that was done by the United Nations, UNICEF, in terms of looking at sexual exploitation and what is known or not known around the world, with an emphasis, I think, on low and middle income countries. Well, to that, what we want to add is particularly looking at what we can glean from the published literature and from what's called gray sources, which are in effect reports that may not have been formally published but are of projects learning, for example, about what are the roles that different social norms and beliefs and structural factors play in the sexual exploitation and abuse of children. So our effort is going to be narrower, but hopefully will contribute to additional information to add to our understanding of this issue. In terms of the network, the way we see the network is basically twofold. The network will be a loosely knit network of professionals, including service providers, researchers, donors, advocates, anyone who is interested in the issue of sexual abuse and exploitation. And we want to try to serve as a resource for those in the field. And the way we envision that is that we will have annual meetings where it will be focused on particular themes, and obviously not everyone in the network will join into each of those annual meetings, but there will be an opportunity for folks to come together in person to do some work together. We also want to have a series of webinars similar to this, but where we're bringing in case studies and learning and examples of the work that you all are doing, both to cross-fertilize and catalyze ideas across the network, as well as to do skills building for issues around doing research, the ethics of doing research with children, for example. And finally, we want to focus, we'll have a bit on what we call knowledge into action, which is as we generate evidence, how can we most strategically get that information into the hands of those who can most effectively use it to change policy and programs. And so we will be doing a variety of things, hopefully, together over the course of the next few years to try to elevate this issue onto national and international agendas and to communicate what we're learning about the nature and how to prevent these abuse, in addition to the body of research and knowledge that we've gained about how to improve services. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Anna Maria now, is that right? And you're going to take us a little bit further through the last slides.
Okay, thank you, Lori, and hello, everybody. I will talk now about the research component of LINEA, and this is this map shows the two different focus we will have. So for the LINEA network, which Lori just described, that will be an international focus, like everybody will be invited from everywhere in the world doing work on sexual exploitation of children. And at this first stage, at the research level, we will be focusing on some countries, which are countries where OAK is already working. And this will be Uganda and Tanzania, Brazil, and Eastern European country still to be confirmed. So a bit more about the work on research. In Uganda, the studies, the sub-studies in these particular countries I just mentioned are at different levels at the moment. We call them the sub-studies, and they are the ones that you can see highlighted in green. So the sub-studies on social norms and sexual exploitation of children are happening in Uganda and Tanzania, and will be happening in Brazil and the Eastern Europe country to be confirmed. Whereas the multi-country study will include all these countries I just mentioned and some other countries that we will need to define in the future. So let's start with the studies on Uganda and Tanzania. Those are the first studies we have started. They are led by Nambuzi Kingombe, who is a member of the center, and it's working in partnership with the Ugandan Virus Research Institute, and with Joyce Wyoming in Tanzania, and she is associated with the National Institute of Medical Research. The focus in these sub-studies in both Uganda and Tanzania is transactional sex. And the methodology will be qualitative. I have to say these are formative studies, so they are not very big, and they are basically formative qualitative studies using in-depth interviews and focus group discussions with men and women in different contexts. And something they are really focusing on is trying to get members from different sectors of the community and young girls, for example, that are in school and out of school, trying to cover different contexts that can offer a different view from sexual exploitation of children. The ethics approval has been granted both locally here at LSHTM for these studies, and we are looking forward to data collection starting either in January or February next year. The following study, it's the partnership with Brazil. This is at a different stage. We haven't started here, but we are starting from the partnership with one organization. And the idea is that in partnership with an organization, which in this case it's Promundo, we will come up with a protocol to conduct a study in the future. So it's a different stage of development, this study. We are already in conversations with Promundo, and we are looking to have our first workshop on social norms in January 2015 in Rio. The idea is to bring a bit of the expertise the center has on social norms to the partner, and they can feedback on their experience on social norms, and then together we can think about what the best angle would be to apply social norms in country and fill a potential gap to the study of sexual exploitation of children from this perspective. And after this first initial workshop, we would have a second one which will be more focused on protocol development, probably next year. I have to say, too, that these research protocols, we are hoping we can present them in the first LINEA annual meeting next year. So as you see, we are trying to sort of connect all the different sectors or all the different components of the project, and so it's a sort of coherent initiative. The following sub-study, the one in Eastern Europe, it's the one, as you can see, our studies are sort of in a cascade. One has started already. Brazil, it's in conversations with partner, and in Eastern Europe, we are still mapping the different organizations working on issues of sexual exploitation of children, which are very many actually, and we're trying to identify an ideal partner to then replicate the process we are following in Brazil, meaning having the workshop on social norms and then the protocol development, etc. So that partnership with Eastern Europe it's work under progress, I can say. And let's look at the multi-country study. As I mentioned before, the multi-country study will include all the countries from the sub-studies plus other countries still to be confirmed or determined. And the idea of doing that is that we want to really be able to do a triangulation of results that are much more in-depth and focusing each country context and reality with a more sort of overview of social norms and sexual exploitation of children at the international level. That's why we have these two levels. This multi-country study will be on sexual exploitation of young girls and social norms. It will be led by an international expert on multi-country studies, Pari Patesh. She has conducted similar studies before for WHO, for example, on agency and women, and in coordination, obviously, with our team, too. She will be using, or we will be using, comparative qualitative methodology. And we are basically going to be using this methodology with key informants, using in-depth interviews and focus groups with adults and young people, men and women. The protocol of this study is under development at the moment. We hope we can pilot the data collection tools early next year, and again bring together a sort of finalized proposal for the annual meeting so everybody can have some input. So I think that's mostly what we wanted to share with you in terms of LINEA, what we are up to and what's coming. And we would really, really like to hear now from you, your ideas on this, and also what are your areas of expertise and work and what you are working on at the moment in sexual exploitation of children.
Let me just say I wanted to add one last thing before we open the floor. The multi-country study is really going to be focused on looking at men who buy sex from underage girls and trying to understand both their motivation, their degree of awareness, how other people in the community view this behavior, how the girls themselves view this behavior. And so that's really the focus of the multi-country piece of the work. Try to understand a little bit more from the perspective of men and from the perspective of those who observe the practice, sort of where this practice fits within different cultural contexts and under what circumstances it's tolerated, under what circumstances it's not condoned, and to try to understand that a bit more. So I just wanted to add a little bit more context on that multi-country study. If anyone has any particular questions about LINEA or about anything that was presented, perhaps we could start with that. I think that we already, while people may be unmuting themselves, we have a question from Sarah Lilly about whether the interviews and the focus groups will be with children too. And I think to respond to that, it depends a little bit on the studies. One of the decisions that we made early on in collaboration with the advisory group is that in the first instance, the work that we would focus on would be focused on older adolescents. So we are not going to be, while we're interested in, and of course anyone who's doing work with younger children or research with younger children is welcome to be part of the community. I think that the idea of the research projects is to be focusing more on girls sort of ages 14 and above, and as well as boys. So that is sort of where we're coming at there.
I have a question. My name is Deepak from Raising Voices. So you just mentioned in the last sentence, but I was wondering if you could say a little bit more on whether there will be any work done on sexual exploitation of boys as well, because in many of the things you mentioned, you were specifically mentioning girls, but I didn't hear boys.
I think it sort of depends on the individual studies as they evolve. So the Tanzania and Uganda work is focused on transactional sex, and it's collecting information both from partners of girls and from girls themselves and from family members. Now, we are not doing, it's focused more highly on girls' perspective because it builds off of work that these investigators have already been doing. But we are also going to be trying to interview two groups of men or boys, well, I guess men. One would be men who are having relationships with young girls who are close to them somewhat in age, so maybe less than a 5-year age gap, but who are the partners of girls in these more transactional relationships. And then we're also going to try to interview a subset of men, older men, who might more classically or meet the kind of classic stereotype definition of sugar daddies. And so there will be a subset of interviews with them. but we won't be doing particularly starting out with boys who may be seeking transactional relationships. We're starting with girls and then who their partners are. With respect to the issue around selling sex, men, again, it's focused on the men, and if the men are seeking sex with boys, then I assume that we will also be looking at that. I don't think we're going to be making a distinction necessarily, but we haven't actually gotten fully through designing these studies, so we'd be very interested in people's thoughts on whether or not we should be trying to include boys and girls, and I think it somewhat depends on how the individual studies evolve.
Can I just add something? I just want to say that something that is important with all the studies and the whole initiative is that we are concentrating on social norms and sexual exploitation. So it's true that we are going to include the perspectives of the young girls in most of the studies, but the emphasis is in the social group, in the community, which is where the social norms are formed and maintained. So our main focus is to understand which social norms in the communities or societies where this is happening are in place that allow sexual exploitation of children to happen. So the main target of our studies, rather than the girls themselves or the boys, but mostly the girls, it's the communities, the men and women in the communities, and understand how the social norms in that community support sexual exploitation.
And that is something which, in effect, was a priority that was given to us by Oak Foundation in this early part of the development of the network. I think it's still an open question, the degree to which norms versus other factors are the primary drivers of some of these behaviors and some of the experiences that boys and girls, the violence that boys and girls experience. One of the purposes of this initial work is to try to see how effective a norms-based approach might be, and to what extent norms are or are not a big factor that play into sexual exploitation. So we could see the network evolving over time as we refine our learning, but the initial focus is there.
Hi everyone, this is Nandisi calling from Uganda. Can you hear me? Given that the first sub-study in Uganda is focusing on transactional sex, we're hypothesizing that young boys or young men or boys in Uganda will have more livelihood options and therefore are less likely to resort to transactional sex for either survival or to meet their the desire for consumer goods. But another thing to consider in the context, and something that we did debate early on, is the recent anti-homosexuality bill would make it quite difficult to ask about questions around boys' sexual exploitation by other men, because there would then be an obligation to report that. And if you didn't report that, then you could have you could sort of be arrested yourself. Yes, the bill has currently the act has currently been struck down because the Constitutional Court found that it didn't have a quorum. But again, that was something that we did debate earlier on, and for now, given our interest in transactional sex and the part that it may play in increasing young girls' risk of HIV infection, that isn't something we're doing right at the moment. But as Laurie said, it's not something that we are ruling out. It could be something that develops in the future.
Hi, this is Sally Nye from Terre from Netherlands. I had two questions. The first one, I was wondering what's the final objective of the research? Like, I know the research objective itself, but what do you want to do with the research afterwards? Will it be used for lobby advocacy purposes or for programming? Or, I mean, what's your vision on that, or the vision of Oak Foundation? And the second question is also if you will include like emerging trends concerning child sexual exploitation, like for example the exploitation of children through the internet, which we see like as a rapidly growing trend, especially in some of the countries like the Philippines. But we also have indications that is also happening, starting to happen in East Africa and spreading to other countries as well.
Back to the first issue about the ultimate goals, I think that they're twofold. One is to try to inform the development of interventions for prevention. So hopefully this information would be used as a foundation on which to build programming and then to evaluate that programming. In addition, I would see it as feeding into potential advocacy campaigns. So, for example, we talk about this knowledge into action. So if we generate information that is new or that has some utility either at a country level or feeding into, for example, providing evidence to the Special Rapporteur on sale and exploitation of children or anything like that, I think, we would try to help pursue those goals. So that would, I think that comes at the step where we're going to look at how can we best deploy and make use of the information, not just that might be generated in the particular research projects that we're doing, but hopefully we can, as a community, work together and take advantage of opportunities that come along. And our hope and our experience from other similar communities of practice is that people are doing work all over, and it may well be that the information that is the most useful for a particular goal that we have from an advocacy perspective will come from a partner who is linked in through the network, but we might be able to help publicize that or work together on a strategy. So I think it's both for prevention and programming, essentially, as well as advocacy.
In terms of the second question, in terms of the new trends you mentioned, at the beginning, because we are starting on this project, we sort of had to concentrate on certain areas. So we won't be including those in the research studies. However, the network, we are hoping it's a good place to discuss these kind of things. And as Laurie said, the annual meetings can be thematic, so we could consider, for example, bringing ideas about the new trends in sexual exploitation and how they work. And another thing we have to say is that because of, at the beginning, we also discussed which area of sexual exploitation we were going to focus on, and we decided at this stage not to focus on commercial exploitation of children. So we won't be dealing with sort of organized crime or organized networks about sexual exploitation of children at this first stage. However, there will be scope in the network to discuss these issues and to bring them to the fore.
And I think just the rationale for that is because Oak Foundation is currently funding this. Our hope is that as we broaden this out, we will move from a purely Oak-defined agenda to a wider agenda. But they specifically came to us to help initiate this work because they were interested in the issue of social norms and the role that tolerance and other concepts may play in the phenomena. Given that, we felt that our comparative advantage with respect to social norms would be to deal with those aspects of exploitation or abuse that aren't, not solely, but not primarily motivated by criminal elements or organized crime or financial rewards, because the approaches to that are much more probably appropriately dealt with by Interpol and criminal, responses to crime, and we're just not well positioned for that work. But as Anna Maria said, we hope that this will in effect, become a mutually owned network, and we will take up issues as the members and those see fit and important.
Good evening. This is Mark Capaldi from Exploitation International. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, just a quick question and point to follow up on what you've just said, and also the Terrorism Netherlands question. I mean, I think it is fantastic that you're doing this research and that you're pushing to help promote a better conceptual understanding of commercial sexual exploitation of children. I mean, the only issue that I would just flag in relation to what you mentioned about CSEC Online is that as we look at social norms, I suspect we'll find that there is a lot more issues around the linkages between different manifestations of CSEC. And I think there's been a tendency to date to do more silo-type research or research in parallel, either on child sexual exploitation online or child sex trafficking or sexual exploitation of children in travel and tourism. But your conceptual study does offer an opportunity to get a little bit, to get in more depth into what may be some of the linkages around there from a social norm perspective. And then just my last question is, it's a shame that neither South Asia or Southeast Asia is covered in your multi-country research. I'm just wondering, would there be plans for you to come into this region?
It wasn't completely clear, so I'm trying to answer some of the bits I understood. The last bit you said, we are planning to go to Asia, right? Did I understand you correctly? Yes. We haven't decided all the countries in a multi-country study, and we are trying to establish or determine these countries in a mixture of feasibility, countries where this is happening, and countries where we have the capacity to conduct the study. So it'll be very interesting to continue talking to you and knowing what's happening in the area. So in the multi-country study, we could include a country in Asia, yes, but not as I said, as a sub-study, focus study, because those are the ones we just described. In terms of the different linkages, the conceptual piece we're trying to aiming for definitely try to aim to understand the concept of exploitation per se more in depth. So I think there will be the scope, as you say, to link different aspects of exploitation and or different phenomena that are connected to exploitation by looking more in depth at how we define and what to understand by exploitation.
I would also just add that, I think that, as I said before, a lot of this sort of very first early work is framed in terms of the needs of a particular donor. As the initiative matures and more voices and everything come into the process, I see it evolving. So I think it's not an issue of whether, but it perhaps is an issue of when. And I think, we had to both, prioritize, it's a huge, as you well know, I'm sure, a huge topic. It's a new topic for us. It has so many different dimensions. And we really wanted to make sure that we weren't duplicating work that others were better positioned to do, and that we are really starting out building on our strengths. So I think, if indeed it turns out that sexual exploitation, internet is, a major point that it keeps emerging and everything, I think that we can seek to raise funds to pursue work in that area. So, this is very much a work in progress.
Okay, thank you.
We wanted to make sure that we gave anyone who is currently has a project or is doing research on, especially I would say, let's start with anyone who has would like to tell the group about something they're aware of or involved in that falls within the particular priorities that we're starting with. And on future calls and on future webinars, we'll bring in the wider group of topics and try to learn more about what everyone's doing. But we have about 10 minutes. Is there someone who would like to just briefly describe some of the work that they're engaged in that relates to the topic that we've laid out?
Well, just to say from ECPAT International, we are at a stage where we're launching a number of global studies and research projects. One is around, and so we can follow up later on those as there is interest. One is on access to justice for child victims. Another one is looking at care and recovery services for children. We have also just launched a multi-country global study on sexual exploitation of children in travel and tourism. And we're just putting together a proposal for a research project which will look at sexual exploitation of children online. But we're, first of all, spending time and hopefully quite a lot of resources to develop an appropriate research protocol for such a project because of the complexities involved. And one other project that we have ongoing, which is also linked to what you're doing, is we try to get a multi-partner project together to that is a follow-up to a publication that was done a number of years ago by the NGO group for the CRC and ECPAT International called Semantics and Substance. So trying to look at the terminology and looking at a more conceptual analysis of all of the different issues and terms and words that are used in reports and in legal frameworks when we talk about sexual exploitation of children. So we've actually just in the beginning stage of a very, very busy period of research, but all of them are multi-country, and so clearly there's huge potential for us to work with you and make some linkages.
Yeah, and I think that as we're trying to position ourselves in the huge world of folks who have been doing this work far longer than we have, I think where we're hoping to make our contribution is both on research methodologies and research ethics and using our meeting as a space to share challenges and things around that, as well as to focus and catalyze more work on prevention. And, I think that the work that you're doing on care and recovery services and access to justice and all of that is incredibly important. But one of the places where we think we can perhaps offer some added value is the focus on prevention.
This is Sarah Bliley from Save the Children. We've got a few pieces ongoing that I think are kind of relevant to the work that you're starting and to the network. One, hopefully you already know about this, but we're just starting a piece of work with your colleague Karen Devries in Zanzibar, looking at perpetrators of sexual violence against children, which will look at sexual exploitation as one of the forms of sexual violence. And that piece of work is going to be running next year, looking at talking to perpetrators of violence and understanding the causes, and also talking to children and trying to understand a bit more about the patterns of sexual violence against children in Zanzibar, where there's an unusually high rate of violence against boys. And then on the back of that, we'll be looking to develop also a prevention model, which the government's really keen to take on. So that's just one piece that I think might be particularly relevant given your focus as well on Tanzania. A few other pieces just to mention, we do have we coordinate an interagency project on community-based child protection mechanisms, and that's had primary research in Sierra Leone and Kenya, which hasn't been specifically about social norms, but has, through the course of the research, looked at how communities kind of view and respond to child protection issues, and actually a lot of norms, social norm issues have come out of that, so I'm very happy to share. It's been running for a few years. We've got quite a lot of findings already, which I'm really happy to share. And so that may well be relevant, I think, in some of the work that we've been doing. Yeah. And two other pieces. One, in Sierra Leone, we did a really fascinating study last year looking at how teenagers use mobile phones and how that might be contributing to sexual exploitation. And I think what's kind of interesting, and you were talking earlier about, your focus is on interviewing adults because you want to look at kind of the community level norms. But what that kind of study really showed was the trends and norms within the adolescent community, and that's driving their behaviour around using mobile phones, sending sexually explicit pictures to their boyfriends, older men, so on and so forth. So I thought that might be a kind of interesting piece to look at in terms of the norms within adolescent groups and peer groups, and what's driving behaviour linked to exploitation. And finally, we've been doing work in DRC. We did a research study, it was about 2 years ago now, on transactional sex, and from there's been programming developed, so that might be relevant to share and kind of link.
Yeah, I mean, that's really, really helpful. One thing that occurs to me is, I'm not sure we mentioned, but the first annual meeting is scheduled for March 30th through April 2nd, and it's going to be taking place here in the UK. So we'll be contacting, some of this might be quite useful to have presented at the meeting, especially some of the projects that, maybe aren't fully done, but are works in progress and have some insights, like you were saying, of the norms that have came out of your project related to community responses and things like that. So, we're also really looking for ideas of people who have work that they're ready to share, and to sort of catalyze discussion at that meeting.
Well, we're happy to think of ideas and share them with you for possible pieces to present.
Great. So we're at time now. I realize that we haven't heard from a lot of people, but I wanted to, give Rebecca an opportunity to say some things at the end, and also to alert you that after the call you'll get a little pop-up that'll ask for your comments on the call. But it also, if you could just take a moment, if there was some idea or some study or something that you didn't have a chance to raise or share, you can just jot it there, and that'll be an easy way for us to capture it. Or any ideas that you have about what you would like to see on future webinars or something you'd be willing to share, because we really want to just make this a platform that is useful for the wider community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca, who just has a couple last items.
Hi. Thank you, everyone, for joining the call. I just wanted to flag, we'll be sending out a follow-up email following the webinar, and that will include a link to the registration form if you'd like to sort of officially register for the LINEA network. That's how we are formally sort of capturing your information, your profile of where you're working and what areas you work in, and that will also put you on the list to receive emails from LINEA. So please go ahead and click that link and fill out that information if you'd like to stay involved. We also will be doing the official launch of the webinar series. So this call was for our fellow grantees, but we'll be launching webinars for the entire network. And the first one will be on Monday, the 1st of December. So I will also send out an email with information on what that webinar will entail. It's about sexual exploitation of people in the Roma community. So it's dissertation work by a researcher named Alexandra Geisler. So I'll send out information for that if you'd like to register. And then finally, we have an email address now for LINEA, which is just LINEA, LINEA, at lshtm.ac.uk. And you may also have my email address, or failing that, you can contact Michael Naranjo, who you received the webinar invitation from, and he can contact me. So just wanted to say, we're here for this ongoing conversation. If there's anything you didn't get to talk about today that you'd like to talk with us about more or tell us what you're doing, please contact me anytime, and we'll be really happy to speak with you.
Or if you know of other people who you would think would be interested in the network. So I guess with that, we'll close, and we thank you for your patience. I know it was a lot of information to throw at people at once, but we really hope this will start to actually put faces to names and really hope to get to know you all better and your work better. So thank you, and we look forward to seeing you on December 1st. Okay, goodbye.
Bye.